And welcome into a victory edition of Spits and Suds. Stars break the Maple Leafs 7-game winning streak, or the Stars had not won in 7 games against the Maple Leafs. Good evening, everybody. I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan. So excited to be joined tonight by starsthoughts.com at Robert Tiffin, D Magazine. How are you, my friend?
It's a fun night. This is a good redemption from the last Toronto game. So
it is.
This was nice.
It is. So mixed emotions because it's a Tuesday night and it's a work night. But they did beat Toronto and they did get 8 out of 10 points.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you just happen to have a Frosty near you. Oh, he's so good. He does his homework. He comes prepared.
I don't mess around, Gavin.
That's beautiful. I'm going to see, I'm getting rid of these glass bottles. So
yeah, the aluminum doesn't really sound the same.
No, but you got the nice crack. All right.
That's true.
Let's see if we can do this.
Okay.
Oh, see, yeah, that's good sound effects.
It's good. It's ambience.
Now hits the ground, and I'll make sure to remember to pick that up so my dog does not eat it. Once again, welcome to Spits and Suds. Hey, everyone. The Stars are 9-1-1 since December 23rd. Like I mentioned, 8 out of 10 points. Tonight, Logan Stankoven, the 25-game scoreless drought is over. 2 goals and an assist. Matt Duchene, a goal and 2 assists. Just let's start overall, credit to this team. A win in Toronto is terrific. A win against Toronto when Rupe Hintz is down, when Tyler Sagan's down, when Mason Marchment's down, and then Matej Blumel goes down. You were down 2 of your forwards just from that game, not to mention your scorers who've been out for a while. We'll see what happens with Hintz, but just a real gutsy effort. Lyubushkin in and out. He was pretty banged up, but came back on the ice. So just a real gutsy effort, Robert.
Yeah, the phrase that came to mind for me, I was curious if DeBoer would say it after the game, was a character win. I think he called it a good road game, but those are pretty interchangeable terms in a lot of ways. And especially when you have a top center go down, after 4 shifts like that, you're going to have to mix things up. The Stars had 3 forwards who played, I think, over 20 minutes with Johnston, Duchene, and Robertson. Johnston was good as always, almost set up a couple. He had one really nice shift that kind of went under the radar, but Duchene, obviously fantastic. A couple points in the night, had to step up and be the top center while also mixing and matching. But the rookies are probably the real story and the real feel-good part of this tonight. But absolutely big character win. There were big hits all over the place, and the Stars actually dealt a couple of them out too, which I'm sure felt good afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a bumps and bruises. I mean, you have to play them because that's how the travel schedule works out. So usually, Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto a lot of times do connect, but to play 3 of the more physical teams as far as hits that they lay out in the league. It definitely was. And kudos to the Stars because I feel as though they matched the intensity at times. It started out real slow. And the first period, and that's what I do want to mention. Jake Ottinger, the post is your best friend. I understand that, but producer Gregory Finley and I were talking earlier. If you're a goalie and you have the correct angles, a lot of times, I'm not saying it's supposed to hit the post, but at the same time, use the post to your advantage. And that's how good these guys are between the pipes. So yes, probably a little bit lucky, but I thought Ottinger did a good job, keeping it close in the first period.
Yeah, he was good when he had to be. At least one of those posts, I'm pretty certain, if not 2 of them early, were shots that went off him and into the post. Or it was a case where it looked like he really had the post sealed, and so the puck did hit the post. But he was positioned pretty well. Really for Ottinger, yes, obviously those posts you can say, if any of those goes in, it's different, and that's always true. But I think the Stars had just as many posts that actually beat the goaltender clean, like a Bork shot on that late rush comes to mind. The Stars had just as many of those types of posts as I think the Leafs did. A couple of those early ones were a little bit more on the outside, or one was off the crossbar. That's true. But Ottinger's only goal he let in was that great Austin Matthews shot, and that's really more about, I think, the shot being allowed. You can't really allow that shot from there. It was a bad turnover in the defensive zone, so the Leafs had numbers, made a nice pass, and you give Matthews that shot from the circle. There's a reason he scored 60 goals a couple years ago. I mean, this is a guy who knows what he's doing, maybe more than any other player, even if he's not 100% right now. So, no, great night for Ottinger, and obviously he's not kind of the story when all is said and done in this one, but he was exactly what he needed to be in this one, even with the post. So, yeah, he deserves credit, even with the sound effects behind him.
Yeah, Austin Matthews gets the crowd going early, just 4:15 into the game. And then it was great to see the answer by Logan Stankoven. And the thing I love about this Stankoven shift is that even before he scored the goal, he had picked Oliver Ekman-Larsson behind the net with great hustle as far as going after the puck, and that caused some more zone time for the Stars. So then they cycled back into the zone, and he went to the net. So it's great that he got out of the drought. But what I love about tonight's Logan Stankoven game, boy, was he a pest in front of the net. He made things happen. And, I remember Sagan when he had that goal drought, and how did that first goal go in? It went off of him. Good. They always, one of the old hockey sayings is good things happen when you go to the net. And tonight he was absolutely a beast. Very like a young Brendan Gallagher, Brendan's getting up there in age. But I just always was marveled at Brendan Gallagher. And I'm like, why are you how is this little guy causing so much havoc in front of the net? So, just a terrific effort by Stankoven.
Yeah, and both of the goals, he was in basically the same position, just a few feet away from the crease in both of the goals. On the first one, obviously, he's there. Then Woll doesn't hold on to the shot. Stankoven gets to the rebound, whacks it through his arm, and then Stankoven pursues further, stops at the net, and then is able to whack it in from behind him. And then he gets cleaned out right after that. But somehow I don't think he felt a thing after that. But the second one, same thing. It just happened to tick off him and go directly in that second time. And even on his assist, when he put that power play goal in off Bork on that tip attempt, he also was, just a few feet out from the top of the crease, and he tips a puck that's going in. So just being in those spots, I mean, how many times this year did we see Stankoven fire a bullet from somewhere, or a one-timer, even against, was it Ottawa? I think he had a one-timer through traffic that felt like it was labeled and didn't quite go in, or maybe that was Montreal, actually. But either way, he's had some shots that look like A-plus attempts, and they don't go in. And finally in this game, it just felt like, the floodgates kind of burst, and he was finally getting rewarded for doing the things that he's been doing for so long. I mean, DeBoer has said that consistently, that he's doing all the right things, not worried about him. There had been some comments about Bork by the coach that were a little more oblique, but also pretty clearly like, this guy's supposed to score and it needs to happen, and we don't know when it's going to happen. Hopefully it's soon, but we don't know. But Stankoven DeBoer was always, I could tell he was always mentioning, and anyone could tell really if they were listening, that he was saying Stankoven's doing the right thing, so he's still helping us, even if the goals aren't going in. So it was critical for both those players to get goals, but obviously for Stankoven, it felt like, yeah, it's about time he got rewarded. And obviously 3 points in a game with 2 goals is a pretty big reward.
Yeah, absolutely. Just getting back to Jake Ottinger for a second, just a quick count, 6 out of the last 8 games, 2 goals or less. So that's really good by the Stars netminder.
Yeah. The Stars, when they allow 2 goals or less, also, I think they've only lost like 3 games when they allow 2 goals or less. They're almost unstoppable if they hold you to 2 goals, because they are usually getting to 3 goals.
And
so
just
that's all he needs to do.
Right, exactly. And just like what we've talked about on the podcast is, don't always blame it on the goaltender, blame it on the defense. Well, in these situations, don't give all the credit to the goaltender. Let's give some credit to the defense as well. Yeah, the sloppy turnover in the first period, but overall, I think on this trip, they've played extremely well.
Yeah, there were 2 really there were lots of excellent plays. All the defensemen played well. Dumba had the big hit. Obviously Labushkin on the penalty kill, but those 2-on-1s, the Esa Lindell and then Miro Heiskanen, both managed to kind of shut down, were really, really impressive in this one too. So you're just absolutely, the defense deserves some credit. And those were 2 instances where Ottinger never had to make a save at all, because 2 defensemen made outstanding plays on 2-on-1s to not even allow a shot to begin with.
What do you think of that Dumba hit? I actually thought it could have been called a penalty. I thought it was very close to an elbow.
Yeah, I think once they saw Domi on the back of the jersey, it was probably going to be fine. I think that's when, it's like Mason Marchment, right? Like, no, okay, it's probably fine.
When I saw that hit, I just thought to myself,
Domi's smaller too, right? I mean, we've seen Stankoven get some that look a little high, but he's smaller. So I think the refs also, they're looking at arm position as much as they're looking at impact point. Yeah, I agree. It could have been really bad. I'm glad, obviously, we're glad no one got hurt. But yeah, it was a little more dangerous probably than it looked. But I think that's more just because of Domi and where he's at, and how big he is, more than anything.
You just, when that hit happened, like, it was like, oh wow, all right, good hit. And then I'm thinking to myself as a Stars defenseman, like, I don't know, I might want to take the next couple of shifts off.
It's I have to wonder if maybe they've been talking about it, even though the Stars, I think the Oilers might hit the least of anyone in the league. And obviously the Oilers, came one game away from winning it all last year. So I really believe that hit totals are not fundamental to success in the NHL, just raw hit totals. But there is an element of you have to be able to respond within games when there's physical play in some way. Sometimes that response can be scoring on the power play. Sometimes that response can be, tit for tat, like it was tonight. But that Jamie Benn hit and the Matt Dumba hit, those were big moments, I think, to just remind Toronto that, hey, we're not going to be pushed around in this.
I think that's a great point, Robert, because one of the things that I worry about heading into the playoffs, and we don't know what'll happen at the trade deadline, is I don't like to use terms like toughness. But I do love, because I think the Stars are really good when they're physical. When they are aggressive on the forecheck and they are pressed, because the one thing is they might not be the hardest hits, but I think the Stars do a really good job as far as effective hits, separating the body from the puck, which causes turnovers. So I think they do a really nice job of not necessarily just going in for the big hit, but going in for a purpose. I think Matt Duchene's terrific at that. And I really like Maverick Bourque when he goes in. I do agree with you. I liked how they matched Toronto's physicality at times. I think that was really important. And you're right, it does send a message.
And I'll also say that I do think you're right, though, that in the playoffs you need, in most games in the playoffs, not every game, but in most games, especially that first series, teams always come out, just absolutely fired up to set a tone and all those things. So look at the bottom six tonight, at least the way it started, even though Blumel didn't really play in the second half, although he was on the bench most of that second half. There were so many guys on there that don't really profile as like big, tough playoff guys, right? Blumel, Bourque, Stankoven, Steele, Blackwell. Oscar Beck's really the only guy with size of some kind in that entire bottom six. So I highly doubt, obviously we know Blumel's just kind of filling a spot until Marchment's back in the lineup. But even the other guys, I hesitate to guarantee that all four of Blackwell, I think Steele's in the lineup for sure, but Blackwell, Bourque, I don't know. I think the Stars probably would like a little bit more size in their bottom six. But then again, if Bourque keeps scoring and finds a way, even in games like this, then he'll prove that he deserves to be there. But I think that is their default kind of instinct. And I think it's most teams' instinct because that's how the playoffs tend to go.
I'm going to be real honest here. I'm running out of things to say about Matt Duchene.
Oh, man. I mean, 3 points tonight, right? Over 21-54, right? And that power play goal, I mean, we could spend a whole podcast just talking about that goal.
It's already making its way. And, it's so fascinating is like they've been tinkering with that as far as getting it to him in tight. And boy, does he needs limited space in which to make the moves that he does. I'm sure the tape will be out and now there'll be a player on there. But the good thing is when they put a player on that's going to open something else up. Yep. What I love about it, it's different. It's unique. It was similar to, one game they used a bumper up top or more in the middle. Like, it's good that they're experimenting a little. And I love that the first goal happened with the second power play unit, because you saw it like when, they all went to hug. You saw Sam Steele there. And Sam Steele did a great job as far as creating the opportunity to pass to Harley, to the one-timer off the deflection. So, I love the group effort that they're just throwing in players as well and rewarding them.
Yeah, that the first power play goal by the second unit, that's kind of a percentages goal, right? Harley sees, I've got a lane to the net and we've got guys there. So he sends the puck in, and Harley sends it low, right? You see Stankoven tips it initially. It was for a second on the replay, it reminded me a lot of that tip Stankoven did right into Marchman's face. Unfortunately, thankfully this time, even though he tipped it into a teammate again, at least this time it was low enough on Bork to just keep going and to go into the net. But that's more of a percentage play, right? It's a good percentage play. It's absolutely the right shot for Harley, obviously, and that's one of the things he's really smart about, is knowing when, just send it to the net and see what happens. Not everything has to be a look where you're going to score the goal. But the second goal was absolutely not a percentages play. That was a Johnston and Duchene kind of reading off each other, almost like they're connected by a rubber band. And once he sees, okay, I give Duchene the puck, he, has his left leg kind of protecting, and then goes between the legs to the far post. I mean, Duchene, as soon as he gets the puck, he knows, I have this much space, I can execute this move, and it's almost automatic, and he does it. I mean, that play
special.
It's really special. It takes vision from Johnston to get him the puck that quickly too, but that's all about Duchene just pulling off a move that we see more and more these days. But to pull it off there against a good goalie and a good team is still very impressive.
Yeah, and he had done the wraparound a couple of times, so he has a couple of moves there. So really important for Spits and Suds listeners to just, like, if you go back, I always say go back and watch the replay, because you'll find little tidbits that you're like, oh wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable play by Duchene. It's already making its way around, and it's going to be on hockey highlights all across the country. What won't be focused on was in the give and go, when it's put back to Wyatt Johnston, he takes a couple of strides back toward the blue line. And what that does is it pulls the defenseman just a little bit up, enough that he can get it back to Duchene, so Duchene can make his way to the net. He might have been able to do it anyway, but he gave Duchene space by just that little movement of backing up, which made the Toronto forwards move up just a slight little tidbit. So I love those little nuances.
Yep.
Very smart play by Wyatt Johnston.
If you go back and watch so many goals, really, and really watch, heck, you could even see it on Esa Lindell's defense on that 2-on-1. I think Brent Severn even called it out in the intermission, but you could see it. There's so much faking going on by both defenders and offensive players with the puck. There's so much kind of reading and trying to get the other guy to flinch, because that's all they need, is that tiny gap. And that's Johnston and Duchene exactly, reading off of each other and trying to move the defense. Who was it? Was it Harley? One of the players, we were talking about Miro Heiskanen a month or two ago, and he referred to Heiskanen's magic wand. And Heiskanen can do that when he's got the puck on his stick. And it's so subtle that you often miss it, especially from like a TV broadcast, unless you go back and watch it closely. But the way he shifts his shoulders and how smooth he is with his skating, players can get completely pulled out of position, and it's almost hard to understand why, because it barely seems like they do anything. But that's a great example of how Johnston just does a little bit just to force the defenseman to make a choice and the opposing skaters to make a choice, and that's all he needs to take advantage of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The other thing, and I have to go back and watch like old tape of him in Colorado or Ottawa, when they show shots of the bench, how vocal he is. As far as like talking and, with his teammates. So
he is very vocal, even in the intermissions, talking with his teammates. I've heard he's very vocal and going over plans and on the bench and everything. We're going to do this. He is very, very okay with talking. And that's not every hockey player. I'm sure there's some hockey players that are kind of like, okay, all right, that's a lot of information. But yeah, he's very vocal. You're absolutely right.
But like the transformation since coming to Dallas and become like, one of the leaders is, tremendous. And, I've just been so impressed. So it's like one of those things where you can only mention so much, because game after game, I feel like I'm mentioning him. But at the same time, I feel like if I don't mention him, it shouldn't become like just normal what we're seeing, because it's, I almost want to say Joe Pavelski part 2. I mean, as far as like the way the age, is a little bit different, but kind of the same, a veteran, taking a chance by signing him. It's just, way to go, Jim Nill.
I mean, the whole context of Matt Duchene, you start with the contract, right? Why does he take the first $3 million contract? Well, he's coming off a buyout. Okay, he wants to go to a place to win. That kind of makes sense. But to take the second $3 million contract, that is not something you see very often, especially from forwards who had a pretty good season like he did last year, even with fading a little bit down the stretch. He's as we're seeing this year, he's very skilled. So already that second $3 million contract, very out of the ordinary for a player like that. And then to see how vocal he is, he's said over and over, if you listen to him on podcasts and interviews all over the place, when I've talked to him, he is very honest, and he will tell you, I really want to be honest. And there are times, obviously, there's things that players aren't going to divulge, but it is really important to him. Like, as part of his character, he has said he wants to be very honest about things. And at this point in his career, he's not caught up in caring about what anybody else thinks. He is going to do what he thinks is the right thing to do in every situation. And that sometimes can be a lot for people who aren't used to it, especially in a sport where everyone's kind of used to hiding behind a little bit of kind of, layers of, sarcasm or playfulness or whatever. He is just right there all the time. And that's a lot of intensity, but that's also the sort of thing that I think you can follow into battle in games like this. And boy, was he ever doing that tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of interesting that I'm bringing this up when the Stars are 2 out of 3 and actually got some power play goals, tonight and on this trip. But you bring up a really interesting point, and they talked about it on the telecast tonight as far as John Klingberg and the interest in Toronto. So I guess the question is, because there are so many Dallas ties, what are your thoughts on John Klingberg in Dallas? It certainly would alleviate some of Heiskanen's time. I guess it depends on how well he's skating after the hip replacement surgery, but we know this, the old John Klingberg we used to see was masterful as far as running the point on the power play.
He sure was. He really, really was. He was special in a way that, whether you think Heiskanen or Harley, whoever should be on the top power play, Klingberg, when he was fully healthy, could do things on the power play very few players even now can do. I mean, we're talking kind of that Cale Makar type of player. Not that Klingberg was necessarily Makar all told, but in his prime, you go back and look both at underlying numbers and raw totals. I mean, he was 6th in the Norris voting after 2017-18, and he started off the 2018-19 season under Jim Montgomery until he got hurt. He was getting some serious Norris buzz that season. He really was that good. And it's easy to forget because of how he kind of declined a little bit, and the team as a whole kind of declined in his last couple of years here. But Klingberg in his prime, incredible player, and no one was better on the power play. The things he could do were just really, really special. But at this point, as far as a Dallas reunion, I think there are 2 reasons it probably won't happen. Number one is from the Dallas perspective. Look, we've already talked about, moving Harley up and Heiskanen to the second power play unit or something. That still seems not super likely. It could happen. We'll see. But even that, I think there's some cost associated with even the perception of moving Heiskanen down, right? This is also a player that I think Dallas, they're not going to say this, and I don't think any coach is making decisions on the bench with like trophies in mind or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But there is something about, this is our top guy, this is our horse, this is our number one, all the things they say about him, which are true. Any appearance of demoting him or saying you're not good enough and moving him down, that still can that's a big deal, right? It'd be, I mean, we saw they didn't even want to move Jason Robertson down for aside from little spurts here and there, because you want to keep those guys confident. You want to keep rolling them out in the ways that you usually do. There's a time and a place to talk about the number one and number two conversation, but regardless, even that's tough. If you bring in Klingberg, then that means one of Harley or Heiskanen isn't on the power play at all. And I think that's where Dallas probably is going to say, this guy is a completely unknown quantity. And if Klingberg isn't on your power play, he's just not really useful. It's really doubtful that a guy who just had major hip resurfacing surgery is going to be a net positive, even on a team where, their bottom kind of pairing has needed. Dumba hasn't always been as good as they've wanted him to be. So from the Dallas perspective, I don't think it's likely, because I don't see them wanting to replace either of Harley or Heiskanen on the power play, quite frankly. And from Klingberg's perspective, actually, I think it's even less likely, because they know that.
Yeah.
And from Klingberg's perspective, this is kind of a show me, right? To get back into the NHL, he doesn't just want to like have a cameo this season. He wants to get back and get one more contract of some kind, I'm sure, after missing, almost all of last season. So that means he wants to go to the spot where he's most likely to get the ice time that's going to help him, and the situation is going to be most helpful. And that means a place where there's a lot of power play minutes up for grabs, right? A team that wants a power play quarterback that doesn't really have one. So I think that's why it makes a little bit more sense to be talking about teams like, Toronto, or I think they might have even mentioned Edmonton, although obviously Bouchard's really good, but maybe on the second power play, although I think Broberg's been, or not Broberg, I'm sorry, he's not there anymore. But yeah, there are reasons some of the Canadian teams that I think Darren Traeger mentioned are there. But I think Dallas, from even Klingberg's perspective, it's hard to see, especially with all the baggage and everything too, right? There's expectations about the player he used to be. I think it makes more sense for Klingberg. And it's kind of what he tried to do in Anaheim, is go to a team that's maybe even rebuilding, get those power play minutes and hope the point totals kind of convince people, hey, I'm a good player who can help you, and then get a better deal, for next season. So I don't think Dallas is that team from really either perspective.
It's a great article on starsthoughts.com, and Robert Tiffin joins us on the show. My only thing is, and I tell Stars fans this all the time, one of the toughest games is not actually the last game of the road trip. It's the first game coming off of a road trip. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure Montreal wants to get back at the Stars on Thursday. That was a really, really great affair, up and down, and some great goaltending by both sides. So it's going to be nice, to see that. I did love how the boys got better as the game went along. I think that's a real good sign that they wanted this win. And and DeBoer mentioned after the game something interesting. So it's on his mind. He went back to Sagan, Marchment, and then added Hintz. He said he didn't have an update, but at the same time, they're going to have to figure out some scoring. I mean, they're not scoring a lot of goals as it stands right now, and losing Rope Hintz would be really, really tough. They'd have to juggle some lines. So it's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think he mentioned Hintz specifically. They don't know. So he was clear that they don't know. So we'll have to see, I'm sure when they get back to town late tonight, and then tomorrow, or I assume late tonight, although I don't know, it's Canada, so who knows. But when they get back in town, he'll probably get some pictures taken, as they say, tomorrow or Thursday morning. But if it's more than just like a bruised shoulder or something, it's a total guess, then yeah, Hintz could be out for a little while, and that would obviously be a big hit to Dallas. The one thing I'll say is that they do have a little bit of an advantage in that Bork has been playing center, and they have Sam Steele who can play center, and then you have Duchene and Wyatt Johnston who both are very much natural centers. So Johnston even tonight moved up and played center. So yes, it would be tough. They already have they're down 2 top 6 forwards in Marchment and Sagan to begin with. So to lose a third top 6 forward, I mean, now you're talking about like Colorado levels of injury issues, which would be rough. But the scoring thus far has still been, even at 5-on-5 at least, it's been top 10 in the league somehow, just barely, but it's been about there. But obviously the power plays underperformance has really dragged the scoring down. So you can't afford to lose Hintz, especially right after Hintz was getting going so strong.
Yeah. Both of them were playing so well. And in fact, DeBoer was asked a question after if maybe that Robertson, since he didn't get the nod from the 4 nations, if that kind of fired him up. And I thought maybe, he would avoid it or whatever, but he said, yeah, I think so, in a way. But then he did talk about the injury in the off season. So, hey, anything for incentive. That's absolutely terrific. Let's get to some of your tweets. You guys are always so great about interacting with us on Spits and Suds. Wasuko says the right Robertson won tonight. Yeah, I agree. I think we both do. Jordan Harper. Hey, Jordan, gotta love the effort after a challenging first 10 minutes. Would anyone be willing to call this a signature win? Yeah, Robert, I'm going to go there. I popped a Frosty. I think, considering the circumstances, considering the injuries, I think in the back of your mind as a player, you have to say, you know what? This was a good character win.
Yeah, it's signature also in the sense that the Stars started really slowly. So that hasn't been as much a problem this year, but in past years, obviously that's been kind of a hallmark of theirs. So it's also signature in that sense. But they weathered the storm, right? They could have buckled early, and Toronto could have put up 2 or 3, and then Dallas would have been feeling like that New York game, right, where they were really going to have to battle to come back. And instead they held on and were able to punch back, tie it up, and then they never looked back. So yeah, very much this, especially on the road, especially they're tired, end of the game, and then a guy goes down, right? It's an all hands on deck sort of thing. Guys, let's step up. Everyone's going to be playing some more minutes. It's just sort of next man up, and they get the job done. And also it had to be a lot of fun to frustrate Toronto as much as they did too. So
yeah,
Dallas
absolutely.
at their best is also a very frustrating team, I think.
I mean, we really did not see a dominant performance from Marner or Matthews.
Mm-mm.
It really was a quiet night for those guys. Aaliyah says, how do we get Joe Pavelski on the phone before every game?
Yeah. Yeah. DeBoer said, or no, I'm sorry, not DeBoer. Stankoven said that to Josh and Razor after the game, that Pavelski called him this morning just to check in or something.
Yeah.
So clearly, Joe Pavelski is still setting guys up.
I mean, I love the random Joe Pavelskis this year, like just Chicago sitting in the stands with his son, which is awesome in itself. Like, that is like so Joe Pavelski that you could sit and maybe probably could get a suite or something like that, or some kind of like special arrangement. Nah, I'm just going to sit in the stands.
Yep.
That's great. But yeah, like he just is showing up in various places, and I think we'd all love to have him tied into the organization, similar to what Ben Bishop is doing, what Rich Peverly's doing. But at the same time, I think the human side of all of us is like, go play a lot of golf, Joe, and just enjoy, because you deserve it, my friend.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he's earned that. He's just he's a guy who knows exactly who he is Joe Pavelski, right? So he was already, I mean, DeBoer, I think, and others have mentioned it, that he was really in a lot of ways kind of another coach on the team just because of where he was. So he even when he was a player was already a really unique figure in a lot of ways. So it doesn't surprise me at all that just a phone call from him is something that sticks in these guys' minds when they have a big name.
I wonder if his kid's done with the trash. He just walks over near the trash, like, and deflects it in or something like that. You know what I mean? Just for a good old time's sake, Dad, you still got it. Blackout Dallas. What do the Stars do if Rope Hintz is out for a long time? What's interesting, I think, Robert, is what they'll do as far as, probably the third and fourth line, because everyone's going to have to be pushed up.
Yeah. Then my guess is they do something like what they did tonight, where Stankoven moves up to the second line right wing next to Duchene, where Wyatt Johnston was playing. Wyatt Johnston moves up to first line center, where Hintz was playing with Dadonov and Robertson. And then your third line is some combination of Bork, Steele, Beck, Blackwell.
Yeah.
And that's your third line, and then your fourth line. So probably, let's say, Beck, Bork, and Steele, or whatever. That's the other thing. Bork was looking really good with Stankoven, and now Stankoven would, if he moved off that line like he did tonight, who knows what effect that could have on Bork, just as he's been heating up too. So you'd hope he'd still be able to drive a line with Steele and whoever else is there. But the fourth line for Dallas suddenly becomes you have two guys like Kuru and Blumel on that line for the time being, right? Until Marchment gets back, if Hintz is out. And that's where you start to see, boy, even if they might chip in once in a while with some offense, I don't know how many minutes they'll get, because how effective are they really going to be in Pete DeBoer's system? So then that means more shifts and more minutes for the top 9 forward group. And that can really accumulate in the intense schedule of January, where they're playing every other night, and another back-to-back, I think, this weekend. So that's my main concern. It's less about who's playing on what line, because I think they have 9 players that could be top 9 forwards. I just think those top 9 are going to have to play more than they would like, because they don't really have an NHL fourth line anymore if they're out literally 3 forwards with Marchment, Hintz.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you this regarding the power play, just a general question, because I think they need more scoring, but I wonder, like, no matter what the score you acquire, are they going to be as effective as where they are currently, based on how the Stars play their power play? Because it really is like system based. So you're going to have to go into a position.
Well, and Hintz, I mean, his speed, the way they do zone entries and things like that, in their first power play, Hintz's absence made it look like they suddenly forgot how to enter the zone.
Yes.
With Duchene up there with that group instead. And that's not his fault, obviously. You're just trying to do these things on the fly, and entering the way they enter the zone, the power play, as we saw, unfortunately, with the challenge in Ottawa the other night, it's a really fine margin for how they enter with speed on the power play. So you just throw one little element off, and everything can get all kind of, wonky. So yeah, I think that does have a cumulative effect on the power play. But also, as we saw tonight, you can throw a wrench in the power play, and then suddenly they score 2 goals. So I don't know. At this point, given how the power play has been the first half of the year, maybe making some big changes out of necessity won't actually be a bad thing. So genuinely, the power play isn't. I don't worry more about the power play because of Hintz's absence in that regard, like in terms of chemistry. I just worry about it in terms of raw skill, because he's been a good player, in front of the net and scoring some big power play goals for them this year. So you can't replace that. They don't have another Rope Hintz liner.
Sam Green, would you take Klingberg in a third line role like Dumba replacement and power play quarterback? If you read Robert's article, starsthoughts.com, and we just talked about it, Sam. Yeah, I think Robert says there are probably better options out there for Klingberg and his camp. I do want to say, because a couple of you, Buck Sprinkles also asks about Klingberg, and he says, stick tap to you in the podcast. Keep up the great work. Stick tap to you, Buck. I will say, I do, from a memorable standpoint, Robert, I'm glad people are thinking about John Klingberg, and it's in a positive way. I think when we go back and we look back at that story, we realize that Klingberg really wanted to be there and got essentially probably some bad advice, but it was very forthcoming as well in his love of Dallas. So I think it's really cool that people are talking about John Klingberg. So let's see. Preston says only to have our leading scorer exit the game early in the first, score twice on the power play, have Stank flirt with a hat trick after not scoring since 1987 in order to beat the Leafs. Too frosty kind of night. Yeah, that's the Christopher DeHardy also says, like to propose 2 frosties tonight in honor of both those Stankoven goals. I mean, Robert and I have to work in the morning.
Yeah, well, you've got one, I've got one. So
that's right. That counts. That counts.
That's a little trick I like to call math.
William says, can someone pinch me? We got 2 power play goals. Not sure if this is a question for today's podcast, but do you ever look at Stars Reddit? I saw a comment about the Ben and Sagan contract saying they held us back. What do you think? I thought they made the Stars fun to watch during rough years. I mean, I think tonight is a great night to address this. What are your thoughts, Robert? Do you go on to the Reddit?
Every once in a while, someone will mention something to me, or I'll see. In fact, today I think I was getting a lot of traffic to my site from Star Thoughts from something someone shared on Reddit. So I appreciate that it's a resource, because
yes,
one thing I've learned over like 10 years of writing about the Stars is that you have no clue what the entry point is going to be for new fans, where they're going to start to hear. Some fans it's TikTok or Instagram, right? Some fans it's Twitter. Maybe more for like millennials. I don't know. Some fans it's podcasts like this one, right? Some fans it's just trying to find any article or news article or whatever they can. You just don't know. So I love the fact that there are places like that, and then they all end up, the cream kind of rises to the top, whatever that is, right? Whether it's obviously it's mostly just this show, but other than that, the second tier stuff also people will find that. That's great. Love Reddit is great. I mean, it's also it's social media, right? So you have to take it with a grain of salt. As far as the Ben and Sagan contracts, I will just say this. You have to look at when they were signed. They really did. The Stars didn't really have a choice. They really didn't have a choice. Right. I did write a piece a long time ago before the Sagan extension, because John Tavares was coming up to free agency in New York. And I wrote a piece suggesting that the Stars try to get Tavares and re-sign Sagan at the time, or maybe just get Tavares or something like that. Because it was an interesting, but that's what they would have had to do to not re-sign Sagan, because he was so important to their team and so integral, that the idea of just letting a player like Sagan walk rather than paying him his contract, that would, you can't do that to your team. That would have just been seen as, we're just going to get worse voluntarily right as we're trying to start competing for a cup. So they didn't really have a choice. And Jamie Benn had just come off the Art Ross season, right? So what are you supposed to do? They also thought the cap was going to keep going up with both of those, right? And then COVID hit and kind of stalled the cap. So I think that's also a factor. At the time they were signed, both of those contracts made a lot of sense. That's what you do. You sign your franchise players to max term deals. And frankly, neither of them, to Jim Knowles' great credit, neither of them has really prevented the team from improving. He's drafted really, really well. And they found players like Duchene or Pavelski or all over the place, right? To supplement what they've had. Alex Radulov, right? They've found ways to bring in other good players. So unless you can give me some example of, they needed to do X, but they couldn't because of this deal, I think I'm just not interested in really being critical, because those players at their best are fun to watch, and even Jamie Benn's still fun to watch, and Tyler Sagan, whenever he gets back, will probably continue to be as fun to watch as he was earlier this year. So.
Yeah, Yeah, and you don't see it often in hockey where there is what looks to be regression, but then acceleration,
Mhm.
due to the players around them. And Duchene certainly has reignited Sagan. I think you could probably say the same for Wyatt Johnston or Stankoven for Ben.
Mhm.
And it's terrific to see that they're playing at a high level in the final years of their contract. So I think that's really, really
Agreed.
special. The other thing I'd say about the two is that while they might not put up the point production they once did, they have adapted their game
Mhm.
to be better at face-offs, to be better two-way players. So it's not like they're one way standing in the corner waiting for the one-timer. They certainly, I know Tyler Sagan specifically. I think I go back to Ken Hitchcock. I think Hitchcock made Sagan a much better two-way player. I think he did that with Klingberg as well in the 1 year that he was back. So yeah, I don't, you're right. I don't think it held it back. I also want to say for the Reddit, I'm with you, Robert. If people are talking about the team, I'm happy.
Mhm.
I'm really, really happy. So kudos, stick tap to Reddit. Only thing I ask, it's a shameless plug. If you could organically mention when you're on there, I was reading starsthoughts.com and saw this because that helps out Robert.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you
I
could
always
say
appreciate that.
I was listening to Spits and Suds or
Mhm.
something.
Yep.
I found that on Reddit and on boards, if you shamelessly plug, that you get blasted. So let's
Yeah.
do it a little bit creatively and organically, but
Oh, no way. No, absolutely no shame with me. Yes, with the podcast, be very creative, organic, and classy. But when it comes to my website, I don't care. No standards at ever. Just throw it all out there. Slum it up. It's cool.
there you put it like on a chalkboard when you've been
Yeah.
bad and you have to write the same thing over and over and over again.
Yep.
That's a really interesting question, though.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Bubba Knocker, great win. Nice of Ottinger to shake off some of the demons of his past Toronto starts. Speaking of demons, Stankoven must have busted out of the Ouija board. Nice to see him score, as well as Bork getting some momentum. Let's spend a moment on Maverick Bork. This has
Mhm.
been very interesting from a little bit of chatter and specifically on Spits and Suds about maybe sending him down for a weekend just to get that confidence up, to now it's like, okay, it seems as though patience has paid off.
Yeah, 4 points in his last 5 games, I think, right? Couple goals recently. He's turning into, again, it's early, but the confidence looks there with that post he hit again tonight, and really his last couple games. He really has started to look like a player who believes that he deserves to be here and believes that this is his spot in the lineup. It's a long season. We're only through game 43, but Bork has held that spot in a way he wasn't early in the season. And I think we really can't say enough about the fact that he got a groin injury at the end of training camp, and that is so tough to recover from because it takes you so long to really trust your most explosive gear, because that's how you pull a groin usually, is you push really, really hard and pop. So it takes a while to trust that you can really, really do that again. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's kind of what was holding him back for the first, at least 20 or 30 games in a lot of ways, is that he didn't quite have that gear. It reminds me actually a little bit of Sagan in the bubble, right? He was gutting it out, playing with all kinds of injuries, and had to have his, leg he had to almost like rebuild the entire muscle of his leg, I think, after he had that major surgery after the 2020 bubble. And you look back to that bubble, Sagan was gutting it out, but he was not scoring. He just wasn't, because he didn't have that gear to get to do what you needed to do to score NHL goals, especially in the playoffs. And so it wouldn't shock me at all if Bork, similarly, without being able to get to that full gear, if it was holding him back a little bit too. Again, I know everyone's tired of hearing that, even with Jason Robertson and his foot and everything too. But these things are real. There's both the physical recovery, and then there's the psychological kind of instinctive recovery, where you can just go in a way that athletes really need to be able to do. I mean, even Austin Matthews, he scored a goal tonight, but it's clear he only has 15 goals, this season. It's clear that Austin Matthews is not the version of Austin Matthews we've seen in the past right now. And we know that he's dealing with injuries. That's a whole other conversation in Toronto. But yeah, it's really good to see Bork not only holding down the spot, but centering a line and finding a way, just to get both greasy goals and beautiful goals at the same time. That's what he has to do to really translate his scoring to this level, and he's starting to do it. And it's pretty exciting to watch.
Let's end on this, Robert. Our Spits and Suds NHL insider and friend Sean Shapiro came out on his Substack at Shapshot. Stars GM Jim Nill on why the NHL trade market is currently stuck in neutral, and he caught up with him today. And here's a quote that was kind of interesting. Nill says, the scouts, have their ideas on what we are looking at right now. I guess the message people need to be able to understand is things change quickly in this business. We know kind of what our needs are today, but I could wake up 3 weeks from now or 10 games from now, and I'll have different needs. So to me, it kind of bolsters that theory of a couple of things. Rope Hintz going down tonight, obviously not to put the panic button on, but that could be a possible need. There are needs all the time. And we had talked about the Four Nations face-off and maybe not making a move until after that, because what if they acquire a Brock Nelson, he goes to Four Nations and takes a puck and he's down for a while. So,
yeah. Or what if one of Heiskanen or
yep.
Lindell gets hurt, right? I mean, heaven forbid, or Ottinger, right? You don't know if your guys are going to come back healthy either. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Nill goes on to say, just look at the conference standings. There's a bunch of teams that were going to be sellers. Now they might be buyers.
Yeah.
What people really need to understand is the importance of making the playoffs. You got a chance. You're going to go for it and not give things away. I could call teams now about a player, and because they're still in it, any conversation drives up the market.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was very good of Nill to say, because it is an interesting year where parity is kind of part of the NHL, and there aren't many teams that we can honestly say, really just a handful, that are like, okay, this team's not gonna go. But some of these teams are winning 5-6, and all of a sudden now they're like closer. I mean, Montreal's a perfect example. They were at the bottom, now they're in the playoff hunt.
Yep. And I think in that piece, Sean even mentions that the economics of the thing are a reality, that teams, basically the price is higher when a team is in the hunt versus when a team has fallen out of the playoff picture, because then they have all the pressure, right? I mean, supply and demand, sort of the same principle here. Like when a team still has some, I guess that's not the right principle, but whatever, when a team is still in the playoff hunt, that's a big blow to their fans, right? A GM basically says to another GM, you need to give me a good reason to sell this big piece, because we're essentially admitting defeat, and I need a good reason. I basically need to be able to spin it as, but we're getting these other players who also can help us right now, or we're getting a ton of first rounders or something like that. So unless that's happening, the cost is higher. Whereas the longer you wait, the more it becomes clear to teams, no, we have to sell these players because we're out and we don't want to lose them for nothing. So the economics of the situation do change. Chris Tanev last year was kind of an anomaly because Calgary really liked Artem Greshnikov in the star system, and Calgary already knew that they were kind of out anyway. Whereas this year, that's just not the case with a lot of teams. So yeah, both the economics and just the pure timing for injuries and stuff, like we mentioned, it doesn't shock me that Nill is being patient, since that's kind of his hallmark. And look, to the Stars' credit, they're on pace with last season. So they're doing, even though the Central is the killer division this year, the Stars are making it possible for Jim Nill to be patient too. So that ends up helping you in terms of not having to spend as much to improve your team now because you're desperate. So,
boy, that's a great point. Yeah, you brought it up, because I think when you put W's on the board, when you put 8 out of 10 points on the road, when you're 9-1-1 since December 23rd, I mean, situations like that, we aren't talking about, but they only scored 2 or they only scored 3. It's there. Scoring is still an issue. Power play, I think, is better, but it's still an issue. It's just that, and in a good way, it's being masked by victories, as well as it should, because now this is a team, you're looking at it, and it's like they are on the heels of passing Minnesota. And that is something that was and the other thing is like, we look at, I think tonight, 1 point away from Minnesota, but that gap between the Stars and the last wild card team, I believe, is now up to 8. And that's something we also need to look at as far as creating space, so you have distance as far as we're in.
Yep. Yeah. You need to be taking care of business at home before you do business on the phone.
Yeah, absolutely.
That
And
rhymes, so you know it's true.
and they were great on the road last year, and they
Mhm.
kind of struggled a bit to start the season on the road. But certainly, this road trip, which was a tough road trip,
Mhm.
teams that have been struggling in the Rangers and Flyers. But I had mentioned, and Gregory Finley and I were talking before, out of these 3 games, Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto, I was totally satisfied with 3 points. They got 4.
Yeah.
So I think that's great. All right, starsthoughts.com. Anything coming up tomorrow that you're going to be working on?
I actually wanted to say the Stars have an off day tomorrow, so we won't see them at practice until Thursday at morning skate before Montreal. But I just wanted to add one other thing. You mentioned about Ben and Sagan, and that's just been kind of rolling around in my mind, and I might write something actually about this tomorrow. We'll see.
Great.
But there is the reality of the salary cap is that everyone, is aware, and especially, smart fans want to try to make all the pieces work to make the moves they think will help the team. But man, there is something special. Sports are emotional, right? And fans, we don't just root for teams to win because we want to see like the numbers on one side be slightly higher than the other. Like it's the stories of sports that really stick with people, right? There are specific players that fans root for, more than others. And maybe every single one of the players in the team you root for or whatever, but there are some in particular that most fans connect with. And Ben and Sagan have been with this team a long, long time, right? Since 2013, when Sagan came over here, and Ben since 2009. So yes, the salary cap number hasn't always been the most helpful in the sense of Duchene's, but man, this is such a good season, even with Sagan battling to come back. The story of them trying to get up that mountain, right, and win a cup with Dallas is, I think in a lot of ways that would be very much the sweetest thing about a victory would be those 2 players getting to hoist that cup. So it's really hard for me to bear any kind of serious malcontent or discontent, I guess I should say, about the salary cap number, because the stories that we have at this point would be so incredible if that all should be able to work out. So I always tend to root for stories more than just raw success, because that's really what we're all here for anyway. And man, there's a lot of cool stuff about Ben and Sagan's journeys, both with the Stars in different ways and together at times too. So yeah. I think it's just important not to get too cynical and too focused on the numbers sometimes as a fan, just trying to move around players to get the players that'll improve the team, because there's something that really connects to us in a deeper level about the humans themselves and the players themselves. So that's a little preachy, but that's how I feel about this.
No, I think it's a great point. I definitely think it's a great point. And, credit to those guys for embracing the community as a whole. And we also need to think about that. I mean, Mike Madonna was so good about that. Ralph Strangis was telling a story when they first moved to town about how him and Madonna were standing in a grocery store and people were just walking by, and they'd have to talk about like, hey, there's hockey now in Dallas. I mean, you think about it, it's one of the great NHL players of all time. They showed the Hall of Fame tonight and the plaque of Mike Madonna, and he was just in a regular grocery store just trying to get people to let them know. And that's one of the reasons that I was so hyped about a statue of Mike Madonna, because not only was he a great player, I thought he was a great ambassador. He was already a star in the NHL. He didn't have to go out of his way to expand the great game. He could have just said, sure, now I'm moved in Dallas, but he took it upon himself to grow the great game in DFW. And I think that in itself deserves a statue.
Absolutely.
Someday we'll have a Robert Tiffin statue up someplace.
Yes, I can only imagine what that statue will be of, but yes, that's the hope someday.
It is always great to have you as part of the program. Every single time we have you on, I always get 1 or 2 comments like, man, Robert's so good. And I'm like, I know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, my parents are great that way. I always appreciate that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So starsthoughts.com is a great way. At Robert Tiffin, we also need to get his Twitter followers up. So, and if you're on Reddit, just plug the heck out of him, because he deserves it. And he's so great to join us on a regular basis with Spits and Suds. So great way to end the road trip. Great way to have Spits and Suds. Hey, we got some cool stuff coming up. We are scheduled. Jeremy Roenick, NHL Hall of Famer, is going to be on Sean and RJ on 105.3 The Fan tomorrow morning. Whoa. So we're going to repurpose that for Spits and Suds. And then we talk to Ralph Strangis on the Stars Day Off tomorrow at the halfway point and get some great Ralph stories and get his thoughts on the Stars. So it's kind of a packed week as we roll through January right here on Spits and Suds. We'll talk to you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.